Keynote speaker, Don Welch.
Well, I'm very grateful to the festival organizers for asking me to speak this evening. And, you know, somebody said, it's good to see you again, and I said, you know, it is good to be here, but it's good to be anywhere at my age. But it's especially good to be here among people, for example, who have the same interests and the same loves that I have. And I'm grateful to you all for your turning out to see a really old man who's slowly falling into the fund of things. I really like that expression. I wish I had come up with that. But Wendell Berry was the one who came up with that, slowly falling into the fund of things. So I like the expression, but I'm not really too fond of the act. Yeah, right. Deliberate Shapes and Senses. I don't know who came up with that title, but they should be paid off in good books. About 1,000 of them. Tonight I want to begin with a public thank you. I want to thank all the people, for example, that I have asked over a period of years who have bowed their heads to writing. I can't enumerate them all. In 50 years, I surely can't enumerate them all. But I want to use a few of them to illustrate what some people have done whom I've asked to write. But first I want to tell you about 1975. A fellow by the name of Leonard Randolph, who at that time was the Artists Program Director for the National Endowment of the Arts, stood up in Kearney, Nebraska and said that they had just done an evaluation of the Poets in Schools program around the nation. New York City came in first, California came in second, and Nebraska came in third. And so as a member of the Poets in Schools Corps at that time, I'm not only very, very grateful to the Nebraska Arts Council for giving me an opportunity to do that. I can still remember the phone call when someone, whom I've forgotten, said from Omaha, "Dr. Welch, how would you like to be a poet in the schools?" And I said, "I'd really like to be a poet in the schools." "Well, we're going to give you everything from Seward West." And somebody who's grown up in rural Nebraska, I said, "I can take it. I can take it." So Omaha was well covered, and Lincoln was well covered, and everything. I got everything from Seward West, except one time I said to Bill Clefcorn about being in Goner, "What the heck are you doing in my territory?" And if you know where that is, it's about 5 or 6 miles west of Seward. So I'm going to start with Ulysses, Nebraska. School is closed. In fact, I closed more schools in the state of Nebraska than anybody I know of. We're in a high school, which is no longer a high school. And we're in a room in which there are 5 students. Each of the students has a desk in a corner, except the boy who has his desk right by the door, because he announces to me about 10 minutes after I'm there that he has to go to the bathroom more often. So he sits by the door. We write the poems, and then we bring the poems to the center of the room, and we sit down in the center of the room, and we read each other the poems. Except I can't get the girl over there in that corner out of the corner. Her name is Tammy Cradaville. Until about Wednesday of a week-long residency, she writes this poem, she gives it to me, and I read it for her in the center of the room. And I ask the kids, "You like that poem?" And they said, "We really like this poem." I said, "Okay, let's see if we can get Cammie to come out of the corner and read it. And she slowly gets up out of the desk, and she shyly comes to the middle of the room, and she reads her poem. I used to be invisible. I still am, as you can see. I wish I were you, and you were me. And right next to the poem, she had drawn two big eyes with downcast dark pupils and long black eyelashes with no face. I used to be invisible. I still am, as you can see. I wish I were you, and you were me. But we got her to the center of the room on Thursday, and she was ready to go. Eddyville, Nebraska. School's now closed there, too. First day we play a game. I put on the board, I'm inside a blank. It is blank in here. It is very blank in here. I am being blank in here. And I tell these fourth graders, I said, fill in the blanks with anything you want to. So they just fill them up. And after they do about 3 or 4 of these things, and I know that I've got the rhythm in their heads, I say to them, now you can go into anything that you want to and write about it in any way that you want to write about it. So that what I'm telling them is basically, what I'm telling fourth graders is basically what I would tell anybody who wants to write, especially poetry. You feel your way into something and you word your way out. So these kids were about to feel their way into all sorts of things and word their way out. And so the papers came in at the end of the period, and I looked at this paper and I thought, my gosh, I would have never dreamed that a fourth grader would go inside this thing. I am inside a poem. I am inside the P. It is noisy in here. I'm inside the O. It is quiet in here. I'm inside the E. There is not a thing on in here. I'm inside the M. I feel good in here. So here's a kid who has felt his way into every letter in the word poem and then worded his way out. So we're in the lunchroom about 2 days later, and I said to him, how you doing, Patrick? And he said, pretty good. And Patrick and I are about ready to eat, well, I'm about ready to eat my first flying saucer. You see, even the cooks get into the poetry business. You know what a flying saucer is? It's a piece of limp bologna, or euphemistically called minced ham, on which there is a glob of mashed potatoes. On top of that is a dollop of cheese, and you're supposed to heat this, and the bologna is supposed to curl up like a flying saucer.
Cool.
Mine was just limp and oily, and just lay there, you know, lifeless on the plate. And Patrick, who's sitting beside me, says to me, Dr. Welch, he said, I got a secret. And I said, okay, tell me your secret. Well, I said, you can't tell anybody. And I said, okay, I won't tell anybody. But if you tell me your secret and I vow not to tell anybody, then you have to do something for me. And he said, okay. All right, I said, what's your secret? He said, I like poetry. This is a 4th grade boy who is extremely precocious, but he discovered in the 4th grade that males are not supposed to like poetry. The males at birth get 3 chromosomes, X, Y, and P. I mean, come on. So I said, okay, Patrick, I won't tell anybody that you like poetry. And I said, what do you have to do, and what do I have to do for you? And I said, eat my flying saucer. And he didn't. He didn't, no. 5th grade, Gothenburg, Nebraska. I can get almost any kid to write. Well, there was a boy who sat right where Don was sitting, and for 3 days he just looked down at his desk. And I remember one day getting clear down on my knee and looking up into his face, and he smiled at me. But he didn't write anything. And so I said to the teacher, Bertha Dayharsh, "What's up with the boy in the front row? He won't write anything." "Oh," she said, "I should have told you about him. He doesn't write and he doesn't speak." And we got busy and I didn't have a chance to follow up on what a boy like that would be doing in the 5th grade. But anyway, we were doing that inside game, and all of a sudden I noticed that he was writing. And Bertha Dayharsh, bless her heart, blocked me into that wall. I mean, she just literally blocked me clear across the room into the wall. And I looked at her as if I were a 5th grader and said, "Mrs. Dayharsh, could you tell me please what I've done wrong?" And she looked at me and she said, "He's writing. He's writing." And I said, "Okay, he's writing." He finished. Half the class was still writing. She went next door, got a student teacher, brought the student teacher in, and said, "You take over the class." And to the kids who weren't done yet, she said, "Hand your papers in." And they're looking like, what do you mean? We're not even done writing." So she said, "I want to see what this boy has written." Well, you can imagine what a boy's handwriting looked like who really hadn't written anything. So we played the same game the Oxfordians played with the Rosetta Stone. We went to the office. We had the school principal, the school nurse, the custodian, Bertha Dayharsh, and me. We Xeroxed up a copy of this boy's poem for each of us, and then each of us gave what we thought was a transliteration of what this boy had written. Then we collated our transliterations. And you know what we came up with? "I'm inside my head. It is a disaster. It is all falling apart. There are little green men tearing it apart. I look out my eye. I see a sign which says, 'Do not disturb.'" And so I said, "Does anyone know what happened to this kid? Why would he write something like this?" And the principal said, "Okay, I'll tell you something in confidence," which is about to be spread all over the Nebraska if you want to take it that way. When he was 4 years old, his father came home drunk and threw people out of the house. He threw this boy, Kelly, out of his bedroom through a plate glass window, which was closed. His bedroom was on the 2nd floor. Then he screamed at the family that he never, ever wanted to see any one of them again inside the house. So I said to Mrs. Dayharsh, "I'm going to run a risk. This kid has come out of his silence and he's written something. I'm going to run a risk tomorrow." So I went into class the next day and I said to people in class, "Have you ever had a day in which you felt so crummy that you didn't want anybody in your space?" Well, hands went up all over the room. I said, "Somebody really wrote well about feeling that way yesterday. Would you like to hear what he wrote?" And then I said, "Yes." So I said, "Here it is. I'm inside my head. It is a disaster. It is all falling apart. There are little green men tearing it apart. I look out my eye. I see a sign which says, 'Do not disturb.' Then I look at him, and he has his head on his arms down on his desk. And I thought, just for a moment, I sent him back into maybe another 5 or 6 years of silence. However, I have had so many kids come up to me with poems and say, "Don't read this. Or, you know, you might like to read this. And so I got clear down on one knee again, and I looked up into this kid's face, and there was the biggest smile on his face, like, my God, I'm good. I am really good. So on the last day of the week, he wrote, I used to be an old junk car, but Dr. Welch thinks I'm a Trans Am. There we go. Yeah.